Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another tropical forecast here by Age Weather Forecast. And we have a pretty big, significant advisory update for Hurricane Felicia, which is not only a major hurricane, but now a Category 4. When I made my video yesterday, it was still a Category 2, now it's a Category 4 at 130 miles an hour. So this thing is definitely very, very impressive. We have very good structure with it as well. Models have just started re-uploading right now. So we have a lot of information to go through peak-wise, cone-wise, strength-wise, all that we'll be talking about in this video. And as well, we're going to continue to mention Invest 9070 as well. But without further ado, let's get in the video. So here's now a look at the latest 5-day tropical weather outlook here by the National Hurricane Center. This is the 2 o'clock, or not, the 5 o'clock advisory. So here's a look now at advisory 11, and they have maximum. Oops, let's actually refresh that because I actually forgot to refresh this. So there it is at a. All right, there we go. This is the latest update. Sorry, guys. I was just trying to make sure I had the right advisory. So there it is. Felicia is now at 130 miles an hour, which is basically the borderline for a Category 4 wind. So they actually did find around 127, but they did round it to 100. No, never mind. They found 132 miles an hour, but then they put it back to just 130 because obviously there's no such thing as 135 miles an hour when you convert knots to miles an hour with this. So minimum central pressure is a lot lower compared to my last video. I believe it was 979 millibars in my video yesterday, and now this thing's at 955 millibars. Not only that, this thing was, I believe, 968 earlier today. It's dropped 13 millibars alone today. It looks like it's going to continue to drop pressure. So it looks like the H-Wharf did verify compared to yesterday. Movement still slowing down, going to the due west region at 9 miles an hour. The ridge is pushing this storm due west, but it won't do that for Invest 9070. There we still have now a 90-90. Yesterday in my video it was a 60-90, so now it's a 90%, not only for 5 days, but as well for 48 hours. So we're going to be really watching out now for our next potential system within the Eastern Pacific. We still have those conditions to be very, very, variable to sustain gradual development, just like we saw Felicia. We shouldn't expect what we saw with Felicia with 97E, but this 970 could very well become something interesting, whether it's a tropical storm or even a possibly weak hurricane. But again, this is the area of cone of potential development, the AOI, so it's going to be further northwest, so it should not be anywhere close to Felicia. So let's go ahead and get a look here at the actual advisory discussion. So there we have Felicia strengthened into a Category 4 hurricane. Again, some minimal center pressure at 955. It's moving west at 9 miles an hour, still 130 mile an hour. Maximum sustained winds at 250 kilometers an hour. So this is definitely a pretty darn strong storm. So there we see have Felicia as a Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. We'll continue to watch out for some gradual development as we continue to go through today and after today. It looks like the storm will gradually start to weaken here. Let's actually get a look here at the actual discussion itself for the winds. So there you have this thing's at 130 miles an hour right now. The initial, obviously, right now it's currently at 130, which is 115 knots. And then as we go next tomorrow, obviously tomorrow it'll weaken to 125 miles an hour, and then we'll see gradual development, gradual weakening as this ridge to the north will bring in some dry air, and as the storm goes further west, this moisture bubble will eventually break apart because of that dry air around that high pressure and that ridge to the north of this system. So we're going to start seeing some gradual, deconstruction of the system as well, not only with the dry air, but as well moving to cooler SSTs. Will be then within the next 24 hours at 120 miles an hour. So it's not going to be rapid weakening. It's going to be gradual weakening, maybe 5 miles an hour, basically every 12 hours, possibly. By the next 48 hours, it'll be 105. Still a very good looking hurricane for sure, no question. And then 72 hours is still going to be a Category 1 hurricane at 90 miles an hour. So this thing's still going to be a hurricane at least for the next 3 days. And then by actually 96 hours, then we get to near the basically 4-day time period, it's still a hurricane. So we're looking at this to be a hurricane possibly within the next 4 days. So definitely a long it's still going to be on our watch for quite a while, and then by 120 hours, which is basically the 5 day area, that's exactly where we'll be seeing 65 miles an hour. So this thing won't be a tropical storm for basically the next 5 days or so. So here's now we look at the actual cone forecast. So you can tell this wind field is a lot larger hurricane wise. The hurricane wind field is a lot larger than yesterday, because yesterday you could not really even see the browns under that X, but now it's pretty well visible that it is extending further out that X, so we can get a better idea. This thing's definitely getting a larger wind field, although it's still quite small considering it's a category 4 hurricane. So it's going to continue, like I did say, be a major up to the point till Saturday, and then it's going to continue to gradual weaken into a hurricane, and it will become a tropical storm once again by Saturday. So here's the latest look here on IR of Hurricane Felicia, and this thing is definitely continuing somehow to look a lot better. This eye wall does have a lot more consistent negative 80 to around negative 80 Celsius cloud tops, fully cycling kind of clockwise around this actual eye. I mean, this eye looks a lot better compared to yesterday, though. Clear eye. It's definitely a beautiful system for sure. There's the eye right there, the little circle. It's definitely a pretty good eye considering how small the actual storm itself is. A very strong eye wall with those 130-mile-an-hour winds, and obviously gusts getting over 140. So this thing is just an absolute monster. I actually had for once confidence in an Eastern Pacific storm, and this confidence has definitely shown to be something, but overall there's not really much outer bandings. It's basically just the eye wall and then the actual eye itself. There's not much extreme banding stretching out like that, because again, this is not a big system. It's kind of very enclosed into a small moisture bubble. However, there is going to be, it's actually going to visible real quick so you guys can get a look here at the actual dry air. There is some dry air to the north because of that ridge and that strong high pressure into the northeast Pacific. But here's look the visible right now. I'll get into the actual dry air a little bit later in satellite, but let's look at the system. You can kind of see there's a very good area of basically very little cloud cover in the actual eye. There's obviously going to be some cloud covers from that initiation, but there's not going to be any storms actually developing within the actual eye itself. Obviously, there's still going to be some cloud cover, not going to be a perfect, beautiful eye. And actually, something I told somebody is that this eye, if you zoom in enough, this eye looks like Laura. Obviously, Laura's eye was a lot larger, but if we actually zoom in into Felicia's eye, it looks very, very similar to Laura's. And actually, someone I told that actually agreed. But you can kind of see it on visible. There is some definitely outer bandings with cloud tops that you can kind of see, but there's actually not storms within those actual cloud tops. The main storms are right here. We have that main convection. But let's now go ahead and get it. See if we can zoom in into this eye. I mean, look at that eye. It looks very, very close to Hurricane Laura. So for those who have looked at Hurricane Laura's eye before, it's just very zoomed in. Those who saw that would agree that it somewhat looks like Laura's eye. But there's that dry air kind of spiraling. You kind of see that dry air kind of killing off any potential banding. So there's a lot of dry air coming to the north, coming from the northeast and going towards the northwest of the actual system, and that's why you're not seeing much cloud cover or actual storms blowing up there, because of the dry air kind of permitting, or I guess preventing from any storms developing. But it's going to start wrapping around. Good thing is this big moisture bubble should keep it safe for now, and then obviously after tonight we'll start seeing that gradual weakening phase, and at that point it'll start weakening at a faster rate because of that dry air. So obviously this storm is in a pretty darn favorable environment, but the further west it goes, the cooler into waters it actually goes into. Actually, at some point this storm was in 29 degrees Celsius waters, but now it's basically hovering between 27 and 28 degrees Celsius waters. At this point, it's closer to 27 degrees Celsius. And then as it continues to go further westward, it's going to start getting closer to 26 degrees Celsius waters. And then it's going to start going toward the southwest a little bit, preventing it from going further into those cold waters. So still going to be seeing warm waters, basically its whole path, especially if it starts going southwest and not continuing that western phase. Because if it were to continue going west and west and west past 5 days, it would definitely weaken out a lot faster and stay at a not only high end tropical storm, but even possibly a weak tropical storm because of those 25, possibly 24 degrees Celsius waters. But right now, the thing is definitely in a pretty good environment water wise. Still, drier has really yet to affect the storm. There's still, of course, that low vertical shear being produced because of that vorticity. That shouldn't affect the storm so much later as well. So here's now a look at the actual intensity guidance. So there it is. Surprisingly, a category 4. I mean, so weird thing. We have a category 4 right now in the Eastern Pacific because overall, category 4s or category 5s are extremely rare in the Eastern Pacific. They're a lot more common in the Western Pacific and a lot more common in the Atlantic itself. But for the Eastern Pacific, just definitely very, very not common at all. I mean, obviously, we've seen them in Patricia and all that, but it's just not common at all. But this is definitely crazy. So obviously, it's expected to start weakening by the next 12 hours. So it should stick at 130 for the possible 8 o'clock advisory. And then it should most likely maybe be 125 by 11 o'clock, unless the storm is not done strengthening. At this point, I think it's most likely going to stop strengthening, and 130 is going to be its peak. But according to the computer guidances, CMI wants to continue at a category 4 for over 5 days, which we all know is not going to happen at all. As well, the UKXI wants to have a category 3 past 5 days, which we also know won't happen. So let's just exit out these models that are kind of the outliers. This is going to be the main area to look at for model-wise. So going to be category 3 by the next 12 hours. And then the majority want to have this becoming a category 2, high in category 2 by the next 36, maybe 40 hours. And then a category 1 by the next basically 50-ish hours. And then back to tropical storm within possibly the next 4-ish days or so. We also have Invest 97E to talk about, and this thing's definitely just a ton of cloud cover with a lot of convection to the north. I mean, you see a ton of lightning to the north of that, but this low pressure is quite open. If you actually look at the actual coordinate of this low pressure, it's pretty far west of all that convection, really. So it's going to be, based on when I checked this low pressure, it's going to be really around here. There's not really much vorticity or anything that crazy. So this low pressure is pretty darn, widespread from the actual convection itself. You would probably figure to be somewhere around here, but it's all the way out here compared to the if you actually look at the coordinates and compare the coordinates to this, it's not that close to where the convection is. Let's now look at the 18Z model intensity guidance for 9070, and there's a lot more confidence in having formation with this compared to yesterday. So we're looking at development for a storm as early as the next 12 hours, but the majority want to have this being named within the next 36 to 48 hours, which I definitely agree with. So we're going to start seeing another named storm quite soon in the Eastern Pacific. The majority for those who have those names becoming a tropical storm want to have it at anywhere from a possibly 35 knot system to maybe as high as a 50 knot system, which will be basically 60 miles an hour. So looking at a lot weaker than Felicia. Of course, we're not expecting another major hurricane from this, but a hurricane cannot be ruled out. Again, it's going to be going northwest and then going due west. So like I did say, it's going to be not that close from Felicia at all. Let's get a look here what the 12Z GFS wants to have wind-wise, and they are definitely quite far behind on this because they have this at 80 knots in the next 0 hours. And then they have it getting up to 89 knots within the next 3 hours. Again, this thing's at 115 knots right now. So this is definitely far off. That's the sucks with rapid intensification, that models become very far off and it's basically useless even looking at the models. But we can use this to look at 9070, as it has 9070 basically in the next 33 hours, getting up to maybe 30 knots to maybe even 33 knots. And as we go later on into the next 72 hours, we're looking at possibly 55 knots for 9070, which is basically around a 65 mile an hour tropical storm. And then we get it up to possibly nearly 60, maybe even 60 plus knots for 9070 within the next 75 hours. So this thing could definitely become a high-end hurricane. Of course, if it does overperform to the slightest, it could very well become a hurricane, a possibly weak category 1. So there's a chance it's to become a hurricane 9070, but it's definitely not going to be strong at all. Let's now look at the actual level pressure for the H-warp. This is the 12Z H-warp for Felicia. They have it at 960 9.7, and this thing's already 955. So even the H-Wolf itself is behind as well. And the H-Wolf has it kind of weakening from now on, getting at 965 in the next 24 hours. Actually, 963 in the next 24 hours. And then getting up to around 970 in the next 45 hours. Then surpassing 980 in the next 60 hours. And you get the point. It gradually weakens, but still that very strong vorticity. And that you see how tight those isobars are together, indicating some very, very strong winds. Let's now look at the actual winds in miles an hour. Oops, that's actually shear. Let's actually change that. Let's actually look at the winds here. So let's look at the winds. So this is a look at the winds, and you can tell we are definitely looking at some really strong winds. But even the H4, like I did say, is behind. They have this at 118 miles an hour right now. So that's obviously, or actually, never mind. They have it at 125.5, but pressure-wise, they are off a good bit. But this is obviously 5 miles an hour stronger than what they actually have right now. And then the H-Wolf wants to have this at a around, let's see here, a mid-end category 2 at 106 miles an hour. And then getting it up to a category 1. It gets to, actually, the H-Wolf is actually going to be holding on quite tight. Actually still has it at a category 1 for 42 hours. Category 2 again for 48 hours. And then they finally get it to a category 1 by the time again the next 54 hours or so.